Welcome to Crossroads. I'm your host, Joshua Philipp. Today we're going to be talking about the Joker and some of the deeper themes behind it. Please remember to like and subscribe. Get started now. There is a familiarity to the deeper theme in the Joker. It follows a character who is a victim of his own kindness, who is cast out and rejected by the world as it is, and in his isolation becomes a parody of society's downfall. He is eaten away by his expectations that the people around him should be kind and courteous. So he gives up, and in his disappointment follows the restlessness brooding beneath society's facade, where he fuels the growing flames, laughing. Now, after Civil War General William Sherman burned homes of civilians in the South, he famously declared, "War is cruelty. There's no use trying to reform it. The crueler it is, the sooner it will be over." Now, Sherman lamented the cruelty of war. He stated, "You cannot qualify war in harsher terms than I will." But he also saw himself as just a player in the drama, carried by the state of the world as it was. Now, the world is sometimes cruel, and the world is sometimes kind. The question is whether we can change the state of the world or whether we need to find peace despite its cruelties. People who look to change the state of their lives usually look to eliminate their sources of hardship. This could include moving away onto a new job, making a change in their daily routine. But people who are at odds with the nature of reality itself are faced with a much larger trial. Escaping hardship on this scale requires the destruction of evil as they interpret it. The cruelty they fight against isn't the cruelty of a single person or condition, but instead reality as it is. This ties to one of history's greatest, yet most overlooked lessons. It's often those who seek to eliminate cruelty from the world who themselves become the forces of cruelty. And those who would remove evil from the world often become the forces of evil. Thomas Molnar wrote in Utopia, the Perennial Heresy, that, quote, "The one intolerable fact of the utopian is the scandal that evil exists in an otherwise perfect or potentially perfect world." The problem, as Molnar explains, is that utopian thinking is itself evil. It leads people to commit evil, in his words. It's the plight of the utopian, the fate of the ontological rebel. It's what Friedrich Nietzsche warned of when he observed the coming age of nihilistic reform. Quote, "Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster." And in his rebellion against cruelty as he sees it, a monster is what the Joker becomes. A comedic parody of cruelty itself. Now, in The Joker, we watch as a man kills and simulates his suicide. Through this, he's shown as being liberated from his former cares. He discards his old identity and in his new persona dances down the stairs of his own decline. He enters the death trance, spoken of in ancient literature. It's the fearful state of a man who has chosen to die. In Pharsalia, Lucan recounts a group of Roman soldiers during Caesar's civil wars, and they find themselves cornered and outnumbered. This is during a battle at sea. The leader turns to his men and asks them to choose death, desire what fate decrees. From there, they fight without fear and without living care for consequence. Lucan writes, "The band devoted stood proud of their promised end and life forsworn, and careless of the battle. No debate could shake their high resolve." Lucan tells a story of another battle, where a soldier named Sceva enters a similar trance. He throws himself over a wall into a sea of enemies where he fought and held off their advance. He was so badly injured that he continued fighting that Lucan wrote, "His vital parts were safeguarded by spears that bristled in his body. Fortune saw thus waged a novel combat, for there warred against one man an army." In the Japanese text, the Hagakure, Yamamoto Tsunetomo explains a similar state. He said, quote, "The way of the warrior is to be found in dying. If one is faced with two options of life or death, simply settle for death." The principle is the same. Soldiers who decide to die do not retreat. They ignore mortal wounds. and in their doomed resolve feel liberated from consequences. There's a destructive freedom in embracing death. For soldiers, crossing that line is what makes heroes, but for times outside of war, there are few states more dangerous for a life to enter. People risk entering a type of metaphysical suicide, where rebellion turns not against ordinary conditions, but towards the basic foundations of life and existence. Albert Camus observed in his book, The Rebel, that we're now living in an age influenced by this type of suicide, where movements of revolt seek to overturn reality as it is. Camus explained that this absolute nihilism, which accepts suicide as legitimate, leads even more easily to logical murder. At the root of this, he explained, is an indifference to life, established by a logic that sees everything as equal, or rather a belief that all things could be equal were it not for certain worldly forces. Such a person, Camus writes, believes that he is destroying everything or taking everything with him. But from this act of self-destruction itself, a value arises, which perhaps might have made it worthwhile living. Absolute negation is therefore not consummated by suicide. It can only be consummated by absolute destruction of oneself and of others. He adds, quote, "Here suicide and murder are two aspects of a single system, the system of a misguided intelligence that prefers, to the suffering imposed by a limited situation, the dark victory in which heaven and earth are annihilated." A similar state was noted by Marcus Aurelius, who encouraged people to manage expectations on life according to what life will naturally bring, and find contentment amidst it. Don't expect people to be kind in unkind places, but also don't let yourself be bothered by them. He explained in his Meditations what happens when a person, instead, becomes at odds with the natural state of things. He said, quote, "The soul of a man harms itself first and foremost when it becomes, as far as it can, a separate growth, a sort of tumor on the universe, because to resent anything that happens is to separate oneself in revolt from nature, which holds in collective embrace the particular natures of all other things." Jordan Peterson made a great observation in a presentation that good men are the ones most capable of great evil. A peaceful man is someone most capable of inflicting harm, because without that ability he is not peaceful, he's just harmless. It's only when we are given a choice in paths, when we have the options to do evil, that we can demonstrate our choice to do good. Only when the soul is tested may we show our mettle. The world is filled with trials, all of which could crush us if we allowed them. Yet if all the world's a stage, then we, its players, need only choose what to do with the conditions it presents us with. If it is cruel, then do we follow it into cruelty? And if it is harsh, then do we add to its harshness? Knowledge of good and evil was that first curse on mankind, if we were to go by the Bible. Yet in our recognition of all wrongs in life, our gift is the free will to choose for ourselves between good and evil. At his crossroad, the Joker chose the path of evil, and we witnessed the sad descent of a man into his own destruction. He expected life to be something it wasn't, and in his banishment from society, he rebelled against the order of the world as it existed. If the Joker leaves us with any valuable lesson, it's that we should learn to laugh at the chaos of the world. He achieved this, but in its shadow form. His downfall was that he laughed in spite of it, while we should learn to laugh despite it. It's here we find the old humor that Dante observed as he climbed the mountains of heaven. And when looking down on the evils of the world, observed that people strive for power without realizing that the divine is in control, that in the wheel of karma or sin, those who harm others harm themselves. The victim is the victor in the eyes of God. That's the heart of the Divine Comedy, and in its humor, may we all learn to laugh. Everyone, please remember to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.